Hey, day trippers, this is Rex, and I wanted to show you something very special. This is our Alice in Wonderland room at home. You know, we love the amusement parks, we love the theme parks, but we also love, doing our blog and watching other people do theirs. There's a lot of great bloggers out there. And getting away from the amusement parks, there are two bloggers out there. One guy named Dougie Carano and another guy named Mr. Ballin. And basically, what they do is they tell stories. And if you get a chance to watch them, please do because they're super. And sometimes, they're very mysterious. Sometimes it makes you question if this is real or not. They're fascinating stories. Well, I wanted to tell you a story that was actually a real story from Knott's Berry Farm in 1979. And I was there. Now, keep in mind, now, this is the 50th year of the Roaring Twenties area. It opened in 1975, and it's 50 years now. But around 1979, I was out in the Roaring Twenties area, and they had a magic shop. Now, today, it's where the candy shop is. But they had, some really great magic props and accessories. And I walked up to the counter, and as I walked up to the counter, there was a guy working behind the counter. And he acted kind of strange at first. He walks over to me and he goes, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, I'm just looking at the magic. Are you a magician?" And I said, "Yes, and I have done magic shows in the past." And he says, "I'm a magician too." Well, working at the magic shop, you would expect him to know something about magic. And so he started talking to me a little bit, and he says, "Who's your favorite magician?" Well, at that time, there was a guy by the name of Doug Henning who was just an incredible magician. Loved to watch him on stage. He was just perfect. I just thought he was the greatest thing on earth. And so he comes back at me, and he says, "You know who my favorite magician is?" And I said, "No, I don't." He says, "It's Ricciardi." Well, Ricciardi was a gentleman from South America who went around the different countries in South America, would perform his show. And it was a traveling show, and he would stop every so often, do the show, and for his finale, what he would do is he would come out on stage, and he'd put on a full surgical gown, and then he would bring out this table that had a big chrome buzzsaw on it. And he would have a girl lie on the table, and as the blade went down on the girl, you could see a cutting action on the girl, but you could also see the blood flying from her and all over his uniform there, or his, scrubs, whatever you want to call them. But he was covered from head to toe in blood. And they wouldn't show him putting the girl back together again. They would just close the curtains. And so this guy, he says, "You know why I like Ricciardi?" He says, "I love the way the blood drips down his gown." I thought, this guy's a little crazy for me. Okay. And, being a magician, I was handing out business cards that said, magician, and had my phone number on it. It also had my partner. I worked with another guy on stage, and it had his phone number as well. And so I just got out of there as quickly as I could and didn't really think that much about it. About a year and a half later, I get a call from LA Sheriff's Homicide wanting to know my connection with a guy named Vernon Butts. I said, "I don't know anybody named Vernon Butts." And they said, "Well, he had your business card in his wallet." I said, "Well, I give a lot of business cards out every day, so I don't know who it was." And the detective says, "Well, he figured it was about a year and a half earlier that I had done it. I said, look, I don't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, so how am I going to remember a business card that I gave out a year and a half ago? So he was talking to me, and he says, well, the guy went to Lakewood High. I said, well, I've never been near Lakewood High. He says, well, he hangs out here. Well, I've never been there either. He hangs out here. And for about a half an hour, this went on with him cross-examining me on all these places. I said, look, I don't know the guy. I've never been to Lakewood High. I've never been to any of those places you've mentioned. He says, okay, well, the guy, was really kind of a weird, kind of a morbid guy. And the minute he said the word morbid, immediately what came to mind was this guy. So I told him, I said, I did meet a guy that was very morbid once. He says, tell me about it. So I told him the story I just told you. And about 6 hours later, he called me back and he said, thank you for helping me piece together 6 months of the guy's life. I said, that's the guy? He said, yeah, that's the guy. And he hung up. Now, because it's homicide, I assumed there was a murder. And if there was a case, that's why he didn't say anything, because he couldn't talk about it. So back then, the only real communication we had, since we didn't have the internet back then, we had the thing called the LA Times newspaper. About 3 weeks later, I opened my LA Times, and what did I find in it? A story. Vernon Butts hangs himself in jail cell to avoid going to trial with Bonin, the other freeway strangler. So what had happened is I had met one of the two freeway stranglers. He was working there at Knott's Berry Farm. And this was during the height of a 14-person killing spree they went on. And for about a year and a half after that, I could barely sleep at night, thinking about all this. It was just really crazy. But, I don't blame Knotts for him working there, because back in the day, when you went and got a job back in the 70s, you shook hands. And once you shook hands, that was it. You didn't have to go through blood tests and drug tests and personality tests and all those things that they give you now. So it was a pretty amazing situation, to see that this guy was a murderer that was working there. But it's one of those things that, no matter how old I get to be, I'll never forget that, because that was just one of the strangest things that ever happened to me. So, that's a little thing of the past, but, I got to admit, it was in my favorite area. I love the Roaring Twenties area. They had all the great stuff, and they had the airfield, and it was so nice over there. I really loved it, and now that Magic Shop is the candy shop. So it's changed a lot over the years, but it'll always be the Roaring Twenties. And I was just wanting to tell you something a little different. And so, the reason I mentioned, Dougie and Mr. Ballin was the fact that they tell such great stories. And so I love to listen to their stories. And so I thought you might want to hear a story from me and see what has happened in my life. So, okay, day trippers, I thank you very much for listening to this, and have yourself a wonderful evening.